Good morning. Today is May 8th, 2026, and today we are going to hop back into Slaughterhouse 5. We are going to start with our new part. So from here on out, if I say we're on chapter 1, that means we're on part 1 at the moment. That's just kind of how it's set up. It doesn't say, trying to think of the right word here. It's not going to say something like chapter 9. It's going to say part 2, chapter 1. So I will try to remember to keep that in mind, but let's begin. It was the middle of the morning, and Winston had left the cubicle to go to the lavatory. A solitary figure was coming towards him from the other end of the long, brightly lit corridor. It was the girl with dark hair. 4 days had gone past since the evening when he had run into her outside the junk shop. As she came nearer, he saw that her right arm was in a sling, not noticeable at a distance, but it was of the same color as her overalls. Probably she had crushed her hand while swinging round one of the big kaleidoscopes on which the plots of the novel were roughed in. It was a common accident in the fiction department. They were perhaps 4 meters apart when the girl stumbled and fell almost flat on her face. A sharp cry of pain was wrung out of her. She must have fallen right on the injured arm. Winston stopped short. The girl had risen to her feet. Her face had turned a milky yellow color against which her mouth stood out redder than ever. Her eyes were fixed on his with an appealing expression that looked more like fear than pain. A curious emotion stirred in Winston's heart. In front of him was an enemy who was trying to kill him. In front of him also was a human creature in pain and perhaps with a broken bone. Already he had instinctively started forward to help her. In the moment when he had seen her fall on the bandaged arm, it had been enough as though he felt the pain in his own body. "You're hurt," he said. "It's nothing. My arm. It'll be all right in a second." She spoke as though her heart was fluttering. She had certainly turned pale. "You haven't broken anything?" "No, I'm all right. It hurt for a moment, that's all." She held out her free hand to him, and he helped her up. She had regained some of her color, which appeared to be much better. "It's nothing," she repeated shortly. "I only gave my wrist a bit of a bang. Thanks, comrade." And with that, she walked on in the direction in which she had been going, as briskly as though it had been nothing. The whole incident could not have taken as much as half a minute. Not to let one's feelings appear in one's face was a habit that had acquired the status of an instinct, and in any case had been standing straight in front of the telescreen when the thing happened. Nevertheless, it had been very difficult not to betray a momentary surprise, for in the 2 or 3 seconds while he was helping her up, the girl had slipped something into his hand. There was no question that she had done it intentionally. It was something small and flat. He passed through the lavatory door. As he passed through the lavatory door, he transferred it into his pocket and felt it with the tips of his fingers. It was a scrap of paper folded into a square. While he stood at the urinal, he managed, with a little more fingering, to get it unfolded. Obviously, there must be a message of some kind written on it. For a moment, he was tempted to take it into one of the water closets and read it at once, but that would be shockingly folly, as he well knew. There was no place where you could be more certain that the telescreens were watching continuously. He went back to his cubicle, sat down, threw the fragment of paper casually among the other papers on the desk, put on his spectacles, and hitched the speaker right towards him. 5 minutes, he told himself, 5 minutes at the very least. His heart bumped into his breast with frightening loudness. Fortunately, the piece of work he was engaged on was mere routine, the rectification of a long list of figures, not needing close attention. Whatever was written on the paper, it must have been some kind of political meaning. So far as he could see, that there were 2 possibilities. One, much the more likely, was that the girl was an agent of the thought police, just as he feared. He did not know why the thought police should choose to deliver their messages in such fashion, but perhaps they had their reasons. The thing that was written on the paper might be a threat, a summons, an order to commit suicide, a trap of some description. But there was another, wilder possibility that kept raising its head, though he tried vainly to suppress it. This was that the message did not come from the thought police at all, but some kind of underground organization. Perhaps the brotherhood existed after all. Perhaps the girl was a part of it. No doubt the idea was absurd, but it had sprung into his mind in the very instant of feeling the scrap of paper in his hand. It was not till a couple minutes later that the other, more probable explanation had occurred to him. And even now, though his intellect told him that the message probably meant death, still, that was not what he believed, and the unreasonable hope persisted, and his heart banged, and it was with difficulty that he kept his voice from trembling as he murmured his figures into his speakwrite. He rolled up the completed bundle of work and slid it into the pneumatic tube. 8 minutes had gone by. He readjusted his spectacles on his nose, sighed, and drew the next batch of work towards him. With the scrap paper on top, he flattened it out. On it was written in a large, unformed handwriting, "I love you." For several seconds, he was too stunned to even throw the incriminating thing into the memory hole. When he did so, although he knew very well the danger of showing too much interest, he could not resist reading it once again, just to make sure the words were really there. For the rest of the morning, it was very difficult to work. What was even worse than having to focus his mind on a series of niggling jobs was the need to conceal his agitation from the telescreen. He felt as though a fire burning in his belly. Lunch in the hot, crowded, noise-filled canteen was torment. He had hoped to be alone for a little while during the lunch hour, but as bad luck would have it, the imbecile Parsons flopped down beside him, the tang of his sweat almost defeating the tiny smell of stew, and kept up a stream of talk about preparations for Hate Week. He was particularly enthusiastic about a papier-mâché copy of Big Brother's head, 2 meters wide, which was being made for the occasion by his daughter's troop of spies. The irritating thing was that the racket of noises Winston could hardly hear what Parsons was saying, and was constantly having to ask for some fictitious remark to be repeated. Once he caught a glimpse of the girl at a table with 2 other girls at the far end of the room. She appeared to have not seen him, and he did not look in that direction again. The afternoon was more bearable. Immediately after lunch, there arrived a delicate, difficult piece of work, which would take several hours of necessitated putting everything else aside. It consisted of falsifying a series of production reports of 2 years ago, in such a way as to cast discredit on the prominent members of the inner party, who was now under a cloud. This was the kind of thing that Winston was good at, and for more than 2 hours he succeeded in shutting the girl out of his mind altogether. Then the memory of her face came back, and with it a raging, intolerable desire to be alone. Until he could be alone, it was impossible to think this new development out. Tonight was one of his nights at the community center. He wolfed another tasteless meal at the canteen, hurried off to the center, took part in the solemn foolery of a discussion group, playing 2 games of table tennis, swallowed several glasses of gin, and sat for half an hour through a lecture entitled Ingsoc in Relation to Chess. His soul writhed with boredom, but for once he had no impulse to shirk his evening at the center. At the sight of the words, "I love you," the desire to stay alive had welled up in him, and the taking of minor risks suddenly seemed stupid. It was not till 23 hours, when he was home and in bed, in the darkness, where you were safe even from the telescreen, so long as you kept silent, that he was able to think continuously. It was a physical problem that had been solved: how to get in touch with the girl and arrange a meeting. He did not consider any longer the possibility that she might be laying some kind of trap for him. He knew that it was not so, because of her mistakable agitation when she handed him the note. Obviously, she had been frightened out of her wits, as well she might be, nor did the idea of refusing her advances ever cross him. Only 5 nights ago he had contemplated smashing her skull with a cobblestone, but that was of no importance. He thought of her naked youthful body as he had seen it in his dream. He had imagined her a fool like the rest of them, her head stuffed with lies and hatred, her belly full of ice. A kind of fever seized him at the thought that he might lose her. The white youthful body might slip away from him. What he feared more than anything else was that she would simply change her mind if he did not get in touch with her quickly. But the physical difficulty of meeting was enormous. It was like trying to make a move at chess when you were already mated. Whichever way you turned, the telescreen faced you. Actually, all the possible ways of communicating with her had occurred to him within 5 minutes of reading that note. But now, with time to think, he went over one by one as though laying out a possible row of instruments on a table. All right, so this is a part of the rising action. Winston has fallen in love with a girl. With the dark-haired girl. And she's fallen in love with him. Now, we know that this is a part of the rising action. We know that this is a conflict, unlike many other books that we've read, because it's not allowed for you to like somebody. Like, everything, the party arranges who you be with. And she is presumably in the anti-sex league. And he, I believe, was also in the anti-sex league at one point. Obviously, the kind of encounter that had to happen in this morning could not be repeated. If she worked in the records department, it might have been a comparatively simple, but he had only a dim idea whereabouts in the fiction department lay, and he had no pretext for going there. If he had known where she lived and what time she left work, he could have contrived to meet her somewhere on her way home. But to try and follow her home was not safe, because it would mean loitering outside of the ministry, which was bound to be noticed. As for sending a letter through the mails, it was out of the question. By a routine that was not even secret, all letters were opened in transit. Actually, few people ever wrote letters. For the messages that it was occasionally necessary to send, there were printed postcards with long lists of phrases, and you struck out the ones that were inapplicable. In any case, he did not know the girl's name, let alone her address. Finally, he decided that the safest place was the canteen. If he could get her at a table by herself, somewhere in the middle of the room, not too near the telescreens, with the sufficient buzz of conversation all around. If these conditions endured for, say, 30 seconds, it might be possible to exchange a few words. For a week after this, life was like a restless dream. On the next day, she did not appear in the canteen until he was leaving it, the whistle having already blown. Presumably, she had changed on to a later shift. They passed each other without a glance. On the day that she was in the canteen at her usual time, but with 3 other girls and immediately under the telescreen. Then, for 3 dreadful days, she did not appear at all. His whole mind and body seemed to be afflicted with an unbearable sensitivity, a sort of transparency, which made even every moment, every sound, every contact, every word that he had to speak or listen to, an agony. Even in sleep, he could not altogether escape from her image. He did not touch the diary during those days. If there was any relief, it was in his work, in which he could sometimes forget himself for 10 minutes at a stretch. He had absolutely no clue as to what had happened to her. There was no inquiry that he could make. She might have been vaporized. She might have committed suicide. She might have been transferred to the other end of Oceania. Worse and likeliest of all, she might have simply changed her mind and decided to avoid him. The next day, she reappeared. Her arm was out of the sling, and she had a band of sticking plaster around her wrist. The relief of seeing her was so great that he could not resist staring directly at her for several seconds. On the following day, he nearly succeeded in talking to her. When he came to the canteen, she was sitting at a table well out from the wall and was quite alone. It was early, and the place was not very full. The queue edged forward till Winston was almost at the counter, then was held up for 2 minutes because someone in front was complaining that he had not received his tablet of saccharine. But the girl was still alone when Winston secured his tray and began to make his way for her table. He walked casually towards her, his eyes searching for a place at some table beyond her. She was perhaps 3 meters away from him. 2 seconds would do it. Then a voice called behind him, "Smith!" He pretended not to hear it. Smith, a blonde-headed, silly-faced young man named Wilshire, whom he barely knew, was inviting him with a smile to a vacant place at his table. It was not safe to refuse. After having been recognized, he could not go and sit at the table with the unattended girl. It was too noticeable. He sat down with a friendly smile. The silly blonde face beamed into his. Winston had hallucinated himself smashing a pickaxe right into the middle of it. The girls' table filled up within a few minutes later. So yeah, this is just kind of reinforcing the whole thing that the party doesn't like fraternizing. Because we see here that when he saw her again, that this implies, and we've seen it, that if he were to look at her for more than a few seconds or to look back at her, that maybe the telescreens pick up, maybe observers would pick up, and they would report to the party that something is going on there. But she must have seen him coming towards her, and perhaps she would take the hint. Next day, he took care to arrive early. Surely enough, she was at a table in about the same place and alone again. The person immediately ahead of him in queue was a small, swiftly moving, beetle-like man with a flat face and tiny, suspicious eyes. As Winston turned away from the counter with his tray, he saw that the little man was making straight for the girl's table. His hopes sank again. There was another place at a table further away, but something in the little man's appearance suggested that he would be sufficiently attentive to his own comfort to choose the emptiest table. With ice at his heart, Winston followed. It was no use unless he could get the girl alone. At this moment, there was a tremendous crash. The little man was sprawling on all fours. His tray had gone flying. 2 streams of soup and coffee were flowing across the floor. He started to his feet with a malignant glance at Winston, whom he evidently suspected of tripping him up. But it was all right. 5 seconds later, with a thundering heart, Winston was sitting at the girl's table. He did not look at her. He unpacked his tray and promptly began eating. It was all important to speak at once before anyone else came by, but now a terrible fear had taken possession of him. A week had gone by since she had first approached him. She would have changed her mind. She must have changed her mind. It was impossible that this affair should end successfully. Such things did not happen in real life. He might have flinched altogether from speaking if at this moment he had not seen Ampleforth, a hairy-eared poet, wandering limply around the room with a tray, looking for a place to sit down. In his vague way, Ampleforth was attached to Winston, and would certainly sit down at his table if he caught sight of him. There was perhaps a minute in which to act. Both Winston and the girl were eating steadily. The stuff they were eating was a thin stew, actually soup, of haricot beans. In a low murmur, Winston began speaking. Neither of them looked up. Steadily they spooned the watery stuff into their mouths, and between spoonfuls exchanged the few necessary words in low, expressionless voices. "What time do you leave work?" 18:30. "Where can we meet?" "Victory Square, near the monument." "It's full of telescreens. It doesn't matter if there's a crowd." "Any signal?" "No. Don't come up to me until you see me among a lot of people. And don't look at me. Just keep somewhere near me." "What time?" 19 hours. "All right." Ampleforth failed to see Winston and sat at another table. They did not speak again, and, so far as it was possible for 2 people sitting at opposite sides of the same table, they did not look at one another. The girl finished her lunch quickly and made off, while Winston stayed to smoke a cigarette. Winston was at Victory Square before the appointed time. He wandered around the base of the enormous fluted column, at the top of which Big Brother's statue gazed southward toward the skies, where he had vanquished the Eurasian airplanes, the East Asian aeroplanes it had been a few years ago, in the Battle of Airstrip 1. In the street, in the front there was a statue of a man on a horseback, which was supposed to represent Oliver Cromwell. And at 5 minutes past the hour, the girl had still not appeared. Again, the terrible fears seized upon Winston. She was not coming. She had changed her mind. He walked slowly up to the north side of the square and got a sort of pale-colored pleasure of identifying St. Martin's Church, whose bells, when it had bells, had chimed, "You owe me 3 farthings." When he saw the girl standing at the base of the monument, reading or pretending to read a poster which ran spirally up the column, it was not safe to go near her until some people had accumulated. There were telescreens all around the pediment. But at this moment, there was a din of shouting and a zoom of heavy vehicles from somewhere to the left. Suddenly, everyone seemed to be running across the square. The girl nipped numbingly round the lines at the base of the monument and joined the rush. Winston followed. As he ran, he gathered from some shouted remarks that a convoy of Eurasian prisoners was passing. Already, a dense mass of people was blocking the south side of the square. Winston, at normal times the kind of person who gravitates to the outer edge of any kind of scrimmage, shoved, butted, squirmed his way forward into the heart of the crowd. Soon he was within arm's length of the girl, but the way was blocked by an enormous prole and an almost equally enormous woman, presumably his wife, who seemed to form an impenetrable wall of flesh. Winston wiggled himself sideways, and with a violent lunge managed to drive his shoulder between them. For a moment it felt as though his entails were being ground into a pulp because of the two muscular hips. Then he had broken through, sweating a little. He was next to the girl. They were shoulder to shoulder, both staring fixedly in front of them. A long line of trucks with wooden-faced guards armed with submachine guns standing upright in each corner was passing slowly down the street. In the trucks, little yellow men in shabby greenish uniforms were squatting, jammed close together. Their sad Mongolian faces gazed out over the sides of the truck, utterly incurious. Occasionally, when a truck jolted, there was a clanking of metal. All the prisoners were wearing leg irons. Truckload after truckload of sad faces passed. Winston knew that they were there, but he only saw them intermittently. The girl's shoulder and his arm, right down to the elbow, were pressed against his. Her cheek was almost near enough for him to feel its warmth. She had immediately taken charge of the situation, just as she had done in the canteen. She began speaking in the same expressionless voice as before, with lips barely moving, a mere murmur easily drowned out by the din of voices and rumbling of trucks. "Can you hear me?" "Yes." "Can you get off Sunday afternoon?" "Yes." "Then listen carefully. You have to remember this. Go to Paddington Station." With a sort of military precision and astonishment, she outlined the route he had to follow. A half-hour railroad journey, turn left outside the station, 2 kilometers along the road, a gate with a top bar missing, a path across the field, a grass-grown lane, a track with bushes, a dead tree with moss on it. It was as though she had mapped it out inside her head. "Can you remember all of that?" she murmured finally. "Yes." "You turn left, then right, then left again, and there's a gate that's got no bar." "Yes." "What time?" "About 15. You may have to wait. I'll get there by another way. Are you sure you remember everything?" "Yes." "Then get away from me as quick as you can." She need not have told him that, but for the moment they could not extricate themselves from the crowd. The trucks were still filing past, and people still insatiably gaping. At the start, there had been boos and hisses, but it came only from the party members among the crowd, and soon had stopped. The prevailing emotion was simple curiosity. Foreigners, whether from Eurasia or from East Asia, were a kind of strange animal. One literally never saw them except in the guise of prisoners, and even as prisoners they never got more than a momentary glimpse of them, nor did one know what became of them, apart from the few who were hanged as war criminals. The others simply vanished, presumably into forced labor camps. The round Mongol faces had given way to the faces of a more European type, dirty, bearded, and exhausted. From over scrubby cheekbones, eyes looked into Winston's, sometimes with strange intensity, and flashed away. Again, the convoy was drawing to an end. In the last truck, he could see an aged man, his face a mass of grizzled hair, standing upright with wrists crossed in front of him, as though he were used to having them bound together. It was almost time for Winston and the girl to part, but at a moment, while the crowd had hemmed them in, her hand felt his and gave it a fleeting squeeze. It could not have been 10 seconds, and yet it seemed a long time that their hands were clasped together. He had taken time to learn every detail of her hand. He explored the long fingers, the shapely nails, the hard-worked palms with its row of calluses, the smooth flesh under the wrist. Merely from feeling it, he would have known it by sight. In the same instant, it occurred to him that he did not know what color the girl's eyes were. They were probably brown, but people with dark brown hair have sometimes had blue eyes. To turn his head and look at her would have been inconceivable folly. With hands locked together, invisible among the pressed bodies, they stared steadily in front of him, and instead of the eyes of the girl, the eyes of the aged prisoner gazed mournfully at Winston mournfully at Winston out of the nests of hair. All right. So, like I said, we're on rising action. So this is intro, rising, climax, falling action, resolution. So part 1 is, let's make it red. Part 1 is all the intro. That we're learning about Oceana. We're learning about the Ministry of Truth. We're learning everything about Winston's life. However, now that we see in part 2, chapter 1, we're in the rising action. So in this, we see, scroll down a little, save PDF, yes. That this summary it's kind of where we're picking up. It was 4 days after the brown-haired girl the dark-haired girl had seen Winston at the junk shop. The dark-haired girl wrote him a letter or a note that said, "I love you." They met at the I'm just gonna say, where did they meet? Hold on. Where did they meet? Saving PDF, yes. They met at Victory Square. They met at Victory Square. Mongols / prisoners of war transported equals big crowd. Now the huge ending to this, again, of how we view society and how we now everything's worked out. This doesn't seem too big to us, but it is really big. The dark-haired girl and Winston hold hands for 10 seconds. It's an affair against Big Brother's wishes. Who is to say? But we will find out later. Have a good Friday.